Welcome to the Busted Halo Show, Emilio and Martin.
Hey, thank you, Father.
This is, you guys have got a fantastic film, which I saw a couple of days ago.
Thank you.
And it seems like it is very much a family effort. And I don't mean just the two of you.
Right.
I stayed and watched the credits. There was a lot of Estevez's, going on there.
Yes. The Gallegos are represented.
Is that fun for you, Emilio? You were kind of at the helm, as they say, of this project, getting to work with family. At least you don't have to leave them behind, right?
Indeed. This movie was inspired by my son.
Sure.
He went over to Spain with my father in 2003 on sort of a fact-finding trip because they were woefully unprepared to do the Camino. No walking sticks, no backpacks, didn't have proper shoes, but they wanted to check it out. So off they went, and they stayed at a Casa Rural, where they take in the pilgrims, and my son met this beautiful gal who was the innkeeper's daughter and married her.
Not that night. I mean,
no,
a little later.
A little bit later.
Her name is Julia, and her mother's name is Milagros, which in Spanish means miracle.
Oh, sure.
And it was indicative of what was to come. The first miracle we experienced on the Camino.
So we hired my son when we went over there to start prepping the film in the summer of 2009. He was our fixer, our interpreter.
So did you really need an interpreter? In the film, your character, Martin, absolutely does not know much Spanish. Was that acting, or is that... Do you do okay?
He knows burrito, y taco, y enchilada. No, actually, you know what? He surprised me with a line the other night. He said, you didn't know I knew how to say that. But go ahead.
Todo lo que brilla no es oro.
Oh. I would like coffee with no cream? Or?
It translates to all that glitters is not gold.
Aha! Hey. Well, ain't that the truth? Now, Emilio Estevez, I have to ask, that knowing that your dad had worked with directors like, I don't know, Scorsese, Oliver Stone, Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, does that kind of give you a little...
Terrence Malick.
A little sweaty palms or anything? Or does that raise the bar?
Well, I certainly have to be on my toes. But I'm always on my toes.
You are? Yes, you are.
Very little gets by me.
Yeah.
This picture benefited from being very low impact. As a result, we had a small crew. We shot on Super 16. We were like pilgrims ourselves.
That sounds good, Super 16. Sounds super.
It was super. It was super. Yeah. But we didn't shoot it digitally, right? So it's got a sort of a docu vibe
I see.
to it, sort of a you were there vibe.
Yeah, sure.
And to be able to direct this guy and in his father's homeland, where my son now lives with his wife, was just a joy every day. So I found inspiration every day. No matter how difficult the day was, I always managed to find some measure of inspiration.
Well, and you also really created the role for your father, Martin Sheen.
That's
and
right.
I assume he's mentioned this to you, but I heard him say the other day when you were not around that this was he hasn't had a role like this in 30 years.
That's right. Yeah, not really since Apocalypse Now has he carried a film.
Wow.
So I'm so proud of his work in this. And I'd do it again.
And you had to carry a lot more than the film. You were pretty laden down with a lot of stuff on your back through most of that. That's got to be exhausting because a lot of the film is you really walking at a good pace.
Yeah.
I mean, you were trying to get away from those other people.
Yeah, that's true. And it felt like it was uphill all the way. But, my son Emilio, all kidding aside, is in a class by himself. I adore him. He's my closest friend. And we've worked together on several projects in the past, but this one is the one of a lifetime. I'm deeply indebted to him. He took a big risk with me. The only anxiety I had was that I wouldn't measure up to his standard.
Well, and I've read some reviews where people
good ones.
I've read all the good reviews where people have described. This isn't autobiographical. It happens to be a father and son, but for some reason you can really feel the energy on screen, the love, the fact that you two are making this. Did it feel like that when you watched it for the first time?
Well, I'm glad that it came through because that's what we were experiencing. We were, Emilio knows me all of his life, and I feel I've known him all of mine. So he knows where the buttons are. He helped build the machine. I helped build his. So we know what to poke, and we know when to hug, and we know when to give some space. And so all of that is reflected in this film. Yeah.
Watching the film. I can only imagine as a Catholic priest, because that's how I was watching it, but I can't imagine anybody would not get to the end of that film and not think, I want to go and do that.
Right, indeed.
And not maybe necessarily walk exactly the Camino, but I want to go and do something where I just let everything go. Right. I let go a lot of these burdens and find my humanity, what I need to let go of.
Yes.
Unplug a little.
You know, because pilgrims get out on the Camino and they realize they've overpacked after a while. They're carrying too much, so they start lightening the exterior journey, and then they begin to lighten the interior journey. You know, they begin to let go of all the baggage that they've accumulated and all the people that they've locked in the dungeons of their hearts that they're punishing for making their lives miserable, you know, and realize that they can't be themselves. And so once they've gotten rid of judgment and fear and anger and resentment and jealousy, all of the things that keep us from being ourselves, keep us from being free, then that's the true success of a pilgrimage. So,
well, and you spoke at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception.
I
you
did.
spoke to a group there. What was? I mean, first of all, being in that church is pretty darn impressive.
Well, I didn't speak in the church.
Well, but I mean, being there is
after the mass, the evening mass on Saturday night. I was invited to speak downstairs in the shrine of the Holy Mother.
Sure,
that was very, very powerful.
Well, and one of the things you said there is that you encourage the crowd gathered at a church. So we're presuming, perhaps largely a faithful or a Catholic crowd. Mm-hmm. You said, "My fondest wish for all of you is that you will find something in your life worth fighting for."
Yes.
What has been worth fighting for in your life? The life of Martin Sheen?
Fighting for life itself, from the start. But, the Irish have a phrase, a story really they tell about a man who arrives at the gates of heaven and asks to be let in. And St. Peter says, "Of course, just show us your scars." And the man says, "I have no scars." And St. Peter says, "What a pity. Was there nothing worth fighting for?" So that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
We all have to find something worth fighting for, because that's when we find something worth fighting for, we have found a way to unite the will of the Spirit to the work of the flesh.
Right.
And then all the rest of us have discovered fire for the second time.
Well, and I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that, but I know in your life, in your career, you've been chained up to rockets and things. I mean, you've put that into practice and said, this is important enough that I, even as a celebrity, maybe that was risky in terms of a career, to say, I want to step out for my Catholic faith and what I believe in.
Well, I came back to the faith as a reconverted Catholic in 1981. and
which was right after Apocalypse Now, right?
About 4 years after I finished filming that. And just a couple of years after it was released. But, I had gone through a very deeply personal journey and a very long and arduous one. And Emilio and the rest of the family can testify to that, both publicly and privately. But it culminated in Paris in 1981, where I rejoined the faith. And I was delighted because there were so many things that had happened in my absence, like Vatican II and the Church's option for the poor and liberation theology. And so I came back to a totally different church, and I came back without fear or guilt. I came back with joy and freedom and responsibility, because I opted to join the peace and social justice movement, and I was inspired by Daniel Berrigan. And so I often say that Mother Teresa drove me back to Catholicism, but Daniel Berrigan keeps me there. So the last 30 years, I think you've heard me say, have been the most difficult by far because of the demand, but equally the happiest.
Yeah.